I actually have a case that happened in Canada that I think is more relevant than that will illustrate this. As you know, there are in Canada we do have like hate speech laws and like hate crime laws and like much more robust than in America. And there was a case where a clearly agitated Indigenous woman was going around late night screaming, "I hate white people! I hate white people!" The first white that I use the word that I see, I'm going to punch him in the face. She comes across right, what punches her in the face so hard it breaks a tooth off halfway, and they declined. The prosecutor declined to go for a hate crime charge, and I mean, I just shook my head. I'm like, I understand that it's cases like this aren't what the laws were designed for, but if you want to talk about chumming the waters, and again, of course, that crowd at the right wing fringe had a field day with this for the longest time, and again, makes things worse, doesn't make things better, right?
It's funny.
Yeah.
I talk about, I was trained as a criminal defense attorney, and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, getting a hate crime attached, like, I
Yeah.
mean, there've been plenty of black people beaten with the N word on the
Yeah.
person's lips, and
Yeah.
that person never got charged with a hate crime.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, like, differential treatment either. These laws are just like, I don't know about the Canadian laws per se, but
Yeah.
like, at least in America, it's risky for prosecutors to go for a hate crime extension
Okay.
sometimes, and like, it can be difficult to have enough evidence, and just
Right.
like saying racial words is not enough.
You're right.
So
Okay.
like, yeah,
Well, no,
um,
and this is good. That's why I'm glad I brought it up because now, again, as part of the whole, it's dangerous if I think I'm always right about everything. Now, after we're done, I'm going to go look more into it. I'm sure I have enough legal friends and say, yeah, maybe it was more a case of it's too hard to stick. I don't like overcharging. It's just a disaster when it happens because then innocent people or pardon me, guilty people are going to go scot free as if they were innocent. So. Okay, yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up.
yeah,
Thank
no
you,
problem, no problem. Like, one thing that law school kind of taught me
yeah,
is that there's no way I could have really known much about the law without going to law school. Like,
yeah,
it's something that, like, I've only reflected on. After I graduated, I was just like, wow, I really knew nothing about this, and like I thought I
mhm,
did.
yeah,
I thought, and so I try to just drop whatever I can wherever I can. I do the same thing with math. I'm sure you like probably do the same as well. So like,
mm-hmm,
my website designer, the person who designed my website, thecontrabandwagon.com, she you know her aunt was murdered by her cousin, and she's still reeling from that, and they just postponed the cousin's trial for 6 months. And she was like, I thought justice. She was like, I like 6 months. She's like, it'll be a year and a day since she was murdered before, like, and we're still at the very beginning. Like, this is not a trial. It's just like
no,
hearings, maybe a plea, like. And so I was like, yeah, like, a lot of people, they don't really know how the justice system works, and I don't blame them, because again, that's by design. You're not meant
yeah,
to understand what's going on in courtrooms, because if you knew, you would be like, what is this? You would
yeah,
understand why people are talking about prison abolitionism and rebuilding the system from scratch, because ultimately what's going on is that there are a lot of laws on the books, laws that are directly related to protecting people's constitutional rights, that are literally ignored by every single person within the system. And everyone admits and acknowledges openly that they're ignoring it. That's what I found when I was training to become a lawyer, and I was working under student practice order in the courts of New York City. I was looking around. I'm like, now I'm pretty sure we learned about these laws,
yeah,
and I'm pretty sure that no one's following them. And the answer was just like, yeah, like, I mean, that's what it is, like, you can challenge it, but the judge will just, override it, and this and that. And I'm like, so there's so there's these laws to protect people's constitutional rights, but like, you're all expecting those rights to be overridden. And they were basically just like, yeah,
yeah.
that's how the system
See,
operates. Yeah.
And to be clear, these laws that are being ignored, these aren't like those, 190-year-old, it's illegal to shave your yak and the gloaming hour on Ash Tuesday kind of laws. These are like modern, relevant laws that are supposed to
These
protect
are
your
like
rights.
laws that are meant to prevent people from spending years in jail without ever being charged as a crime, which happens all the time in the United States
Yeah.
of America. Yeah.
And which is why bail disparity and difference in bail has such an it's something that superficially looks like it's not a problem, but when you see who it disproportionately impacts, and by coincidence who that disproportionately allows to fall through the cracks and then be incarcerated ad nauseum for how long. Yeah, it's kind of eye opening, man. It's
Yeah, and that's exactly why people are encouraged to continue looking at things superficially, so that you
yeah.
never figure it out. And so like that's the insidiousness of what we're dealing with when we're trying to unravel racism. And I feel like a lot of people miss that level of insidiousness that exists, that you have to do something about if you're going to solve the question of racism. I think a lot of people don't want to face that reality because it's sick. It's evil. And you would have to acknowledge that, like, you know that's kind of what a lot of our systems were based on, a system of dehumanization, of not valuing human life. We treat people who end up going to prison like they should be thrown into the trash and never to be seen again.
Yeah.
And that's just how we've always been in this country. We haven't valued life from the very beginning. So people who come and talk to me about, oh, we care about the children and we got
Oh,
to protect people's feelings. I'm like, y'all are not. We're not even protecting people's lives. We can't
yeah.
even figure out this gun situation. We'd rather just let our kids keep getting blown away than do even a single thing to lift our finger to try to save their lives. So I mean, I can't take people who claim to want to save lives seriously, and I can't take people who want to do something about racism seriously until I know that they're willing to acknowledge the depth of evil that this place has propagated over generations. There is no bottom. Like there were literally banks specializing in mortgaging black women's wombs in this country. Like we have to at some point acknowledge these things and decide that we're going to move forward in a productive manner. But the acknowledgement has to happen first, and it has not happened. It has not happened. In terms of your comparison to sexism and using the judicial system, I want to draw some distinctions for you and get your perspective on it. Okay,
Okay.
so the judicial system um, has a history, and in the United States of America, that history is chock full of white supremacy and racism. And same with the prison system, even more so, I would say. The prison
Right.
system, which is why so many black people have contact with or are within the system right now. Um, Not to mention, politicians' stated goal to transform the prison system into, a
Modern
plantation, basically.
slavery.
Yeah. So, like, I
Yeah.
mean, we also have that. But, so there's just, again, the difference may be in that magnitude, right? Like,
Yeah.
the magnitude of the discrimination is extreme. But the question is the gap, as you said, attributable to discrimination against men? And or is it attributable to discrimination in favor of women?
In a zero sum system, they're interchangeable, aren't they?
But I don't think that they are.
I agree. I agree that they would be different ideas conceptually, but in terms of like mathematically how the biases play out, whether it's because they're being hard on men or being soft on women, is still the same. The gap's
Well,
still
the
there,
yeah,
right?
the outcome is still there, right? But like I thought that we were talking about the reason why. Like you
Yeah.
were talking about
Yeah.
men, you were
Yeah.
using the metaphor to say that discrimination against men to make a comparison about discrimination against like black people, for example.
Yeah.
But like, I guess my point is that the difference is like we have this whole historic generations long historical legacy that involves racism as it relates to the system, and it's a part of the system. And so like
Right.
when we see those discrepancies in the gaps, for us it informs us that that history is being implicated. It doesn't necessarily, we don't treat it as being a neutral objective outcome that just occurred and like maybe we need to do some tinkering to change the numbers. We just look at it to show, like we use that differential to implicate the historical legacy of racism. And so a lot of people do have a problem with that system, but the reason why we don't is because the reason why a lot of black people don't have a problem with it is because we live in a racist society all the time. We know how prevalent it is. We know it's so far beyond the beyond, it like impacting us, like so far beyond what most people are even imagining. So like for us, it's a lot easier to accept that that gap definitely implies racism. If you think that racism is scant, you know, if you think that it's scarce, then I think that it's less likely you're going to believe that that gap actually implicates a racial element and that maybe there's just, you know, maybe the differential can be caused by other variables. You know, that's the conversation a lot of people on Twitter like to have. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? What about this? What about that? And the huge historical generations long legacy just like left to rot for for whatever reason. But you know, I think that's the difference is like we don't have those numbers. You know, we don't have that legacy to point to in the criminal justice system to say, oh, men were discriminated against because they were men in the criminal justice system. We don't have that history. Like what we do have is judges, district attorneys speaking about criminalizing women and going easier on them in their speech. The same way we have that reflected in sentencing hearings and stuff with white versus black defendants. So, you know, we have some of the characteristics, you know, but not all of it.
I guess that, and that's where it comes down to is that if I'm viewing this is a zero sum thing where discrimination against one versus discrimination in favor of other, the opposite vector, if you will, maybe they're not interchangeable. I liked what you brought up about the judges that will actually admit a bias, and especially in cases of adult teacher, underage child. Donald Poppy, judge in New York, goes on record giving a woman no jail time, goes on record his decision. There is no doubt that if the genders were reversed, I would be inclined to order some incarceration. And I'm like, I think about what got Persky recalled. I'm like, how did that guy work another day in his life and admit that, right? But yeah, my feminist
what
friends.
about Brock Turner, the behind
Yeah.
the dumpster
Oh,
rapist?
see now, well, that was an incredibly light sentence. The two things I would say about that, obviously, it was an egregious miscarriage of justice. I would say that the laws in California around that were horrible. I think in a lot of ways, Persky, who was the judge beyond that, they kind of shot the messenger. Like, how did they give such a light sentence to begin with? Because the laws at the time, it's a loophole they've immediately patched, thank God. The law at the time required to get a rape conviction required like active resistance. And as it turned out, the case of somebody unconscious, was only fell under sexual assault, a much lighter thing.
Yeah.
And
So you're describing like legal
the laws were horrible in that case.
But there was also the judge's statements about Brock Turner.
About what the sentence. Do you know why he considered what the sentence would do to him? Because he was required to by the law. And the people that wanted those laws,
but brother,
where it's like
Charles. See, this is what I mean. Like, this is what I mean. Like, there's only so far theory can take you. What you have to realize is that the reality of what these judges do whatever they want. You like, if you if you step foot in a court, I'm telling you, brother, you would be shocked. I talk about it. I know so many lawyers who are working in the field right now. They talk to me and they're just like, oh, this judge, that judge. Like, I know people have gotten judges removed, only because they were people of color who ended up investigating these judges
Yeah,
and finding out their racial bias, all these different
yeah.
things. To me, when I read that judge's words, he clearly was concerned about the future of that young man, the future of him. He's not required to think of that guy's future in terms of sentencing.
Are you
The law does
are
not
you
require him to think about the future possibilities of, I am certain, I'm 100% certain the law does not require him to think about future possibilities for Brock Turner.
well,
Absolutely
then
certain.
that is
Um,
something I'm going to have to go back and check myself. I was obviously under the impression that the impact of the sentence on the convicted supposed to be a mitigating factor in that case.
for
I'm
what? Why would that
for
ever
what?
be a mitigating factor?
So
For
that,
what?
if a woman commits a crime, you don't send her to prison. That's for instance.
I mean, Amber
And
Geiger got sent to prison. Oh, but that was one thing I wanted to tell you
that
about. She's up for parole next year. She's getting
oh,
out. And
she
Derek
will
Chauvin
not
will
get
never
parole.
spend 22 and a half years in prison either. Like, none of these cops ever
Oh,
spend the amount of time they get. No cop has ever spent the amount of time they've been sentenced to in prison. Zero.
Geiger might skate, but Derek, just because the whole thing with Derek Chauvin was so like
Brother,
such
I'm
such
telling you, I
attention was
follow
drawn.
all these cases. Some of the
I
most
I
violent.
hope you're wrong. I
I'm
hope you're
not
wrong.
wrong,
You may
brother.
not be.
Like,
Well,
I'm telling you, this is not like, it's not a one off. Like, these things happen all the time, so we see the pattern already. Like, we see what happens. These cops, they'll kill people and they'll get paid, and then even if they're charged, and having to defend themselves in court, they'll be allowed to retire instead of get fired. Even if they're convicted of raping kids, pedophilia, they still are allowed to retire. They don't get there's no accountability whatsoever. And they'll be protected by their superiors and by the system. So it's just, that's the evidence. Like, that's what actually happens. And like, I think there's this huge discrepancy between what happens in reality and what people believe happens. And it's just so difficult to overcome that, because the only way you can do it is by, like, finding out yourself. Like, there's really nothing else that, like, allows people to, like, realize that, like, something that they may hear that seems extreme, that seems radical, it's actually, like, in line with reality. You just didn't know the reality. And, like, that is a very difficult thing for people to accept, is right what we've been talking about this whole time, really, about people coming into a new perspective that they may not have access to. And that's what my experience of going to law school was, and working in the courts. I was like, what is this? I was like, what is this? Like, literally, like, I mean, this is supposed to be a justice system? Like, I don't see justice anywhere I look. I see literally injustices everywhere. And I see a whole system of people on both sides: defense, prosecution, the judge, the bailiffs, the cops. I see everywhere I look, I see injustice. So, what is this system? And I would have never asked that question if I didn't step foot in the courtroom and have to represent some courts in criminal court, talk to them and interview them, find out what happened to them, talk and negotiate with district attorneys, find out what they do. Like, it is chock full of corruption beyond people's imagining, and it's not represented anywhere. Not in media. The most corrupt cop media show has not even touched what actually happens in real life. I promise you. Like, that is the reality. And it's very hard. All I can do is take the knowledge that I've gained from personal experience and from, hearing and learning other people's personal experiences, and just, like, try to spread the word. But it's very difficult when you're someone who is not given a sense of authority or, like, expertise, or, you're not looked at as having any knowledge that's valuable. And so a lot of times I'll just be talking to a wall, but, like, once in a while something will resonate, and just like when I teach math, you find a way, you find a path, and luckily I've been trained to do that. I've practiced a lot in a lot of different contexts, and that's why I think I'm specially situated to kind of have these conversations, break these things down, share with people what I've learned, because I've gone through a lot of pain to find all this stuff out about the justice system. You know, I got rid of my career in teaching and went into law school because my students started getting arrested and I couldn't understand it. It literally was illogical to me what was going on to my students. So I investigated the school to prison pipeline just to figure it out, you know, and then I wanted to become a defense attorney just to represent these people who I realized were being unfairly hooked by this system that was then churning them into profit. And and then I couldn't even do that because I ran into that glass ceiling, brother. So like, you know, there's just layers upon layers upon layers. And all I can do at this point, I feel like, is express to people how many layers there are and why it's so important that we deal with breaking some of those layers down. I want you to understand that that is purely up to the judge to decide that future, right? And you can side by side place, and I've done this before, like you can play judges talking about the same case, same type of case, talking about a black defendant and a white defendant. And you can hear in the speeches that in one case, the person sees themselves. Sometimes they even say it, that they see themselves in the defendant. And that is why they see the future. But these old ass racist white judges, bro, they are not seeing themselves in the face of these black defendants. They see a criminal that needs to be put away under the jail if possible. And that's how it is, man. And you know, I don't think that men are just, I don't think men are automatically being looked at like they need to be put under the jail just because they're men. Maybe because of the violence that they've perpetrated, but not because of their maleness. You know, like these black men, they don't need to do anything. They just need to look. These Latino men, they don't need to do anything at all. And I know that because I've seen behind the curtain and because I hear what these district attorneys who make decisions about their life and death and imprisonment say, and, you know, and what the judges say. You can, I mean, it's all out there. It's not even hidden. And the problem is, you're not going to read a news story about it because it's all happening behind closed doors and everyone's cool with it happening behind closed doors the way it happens. It's insane.